friends, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to be discussing something that I asked you guys on Twitter and only really a handful of people kind of answered. And that is how I draft, I create, figure out a character, their lifespan throughout like a book or a whip or a series that I am currently writing. So let's just kind of get into it because you guys did have a couple questions and there were some that kind of were like duplicates and some that were pretty much overarching. So yeah. Before I get into it though, I am going to say that the process is different for everyone. This is just kind of what I have found that works really well for this situation, for how my brain works. And I'm not going to lie to you, even though this is like a pretty much a tried and true method for me. I'm currently on my third draft of my work in progress right now that I'm hoping to get published in the future. And I literally just finished wrapping up and making final touches to everything, and things still might change before I get into the fourth draft, which will be like, this is it, you guys, to my characters. This is me talking to my characters. This is it, you guys. You can't expand anymore after this draft. Like, once I start the fourth draft, everything that you have is set in stone. Basically, my characters, after I make like the base outline, they basically have a mind of their own, and if they don't like something that I made for them, they will make it known, and it's so difficult to write them. It's so difficult. So I literally just said that my characters talk to me in terms of like what they want to do, their personalities, their backstories, and whether or not something that they're doing in the whip that I've like crafted is something that they'd still want to do. It's odd, I know, but like, it's the method that works for me, and I find that listening to them is like the best way for me to really just kind of understand what is going on and to really just get a feel for like how to make this work and how to make kind of the progression of the story to work. I don't start a story without the characters. When it comes to story making, I'll have maybe like an idea in my head, like a plot or a scene or maybe like a character speaking, and that's where I start. And then I go from creating the characters and creating the dynamics between each character, but I try to fill in that gap where like the scene is starting, who is speaking, and blah 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 blah. I start off with an outline. It sounds stupid, but I use the ones that you could probably like Google and find on Tumblr. It's literally just like a basic like name, date of birth, personality, zodiac sign, how they look, their style, and that kind of gives me an idea of what I want them to be like. And it's just a really rough idea. It's like the baseline of everything that I build upon after that. And sometimes I do base characters off of people that I do know. One person that I love to use as a backboard for any characters that I make is my sister, and she's literally a seeing version of Toph. If that gives you any indication as to like future characters that you guys might see in, if my books ever get published and you have a chance to read them, there's always going to be a Toph character, just because my sister is like an easy base for me to start off of. Like a very easy base. I also go ahead and set the relationships early on in terms, I don't really do romantic relationships right away. I tend to wait for that until I have the entire cast of characters set. But when it comes to like platonic or familial relationships, I set those right away, just because I find that if characters butt heads or don't really mesh in this character dynamic, it's going to be really awkward, and if it's not the character dynamic that I was hoping to really set out to make, then I don't want it. It can like probably like move into a different character dynamic or like a relationship dynamic, but I do like to set out like the dynamics that I have and really see if like if the personalities are meshing, if that's what I want, or if I want them to clash a little bit more. And like I said, I also tend to base character friendship relationships off friendships that I already know, or maybe ones that I watch in terms of like television and movies and books, just because it's easier to have like a base idea of how their interactions are going to be, which I feel makes kind of their chemistry and their interactions and their dialogue a lot more realistic. Honestly, the biggest piece of advice I can give you when it comes to building relationships and friendships is just look for inspiration within your own. Like, trying to force an idea of what like a relationship is when it's not what you want for this specific set of characters isn't gonna work. Look at like how you and your friends act, how you and your friends talk. Look at how you and your significant other speak to each other. Look at how characters speak to each other, just because like while these guys aren't like realistic, these authors did get published, so that means that there is some like idea you can glean from them in terms of like their personalities and like how they work together as a team, and like how like flaws and everything mesh together, and how you can back that up and like complement each other, if that makes sense. Any kind of sense at all. And then after I have that all set, I let them have that. And that sounds weird considering they're fictional characters and like they're talking to me, but like I literally just let them have that. Like my biggest issue with this WIP was that so many characters didn't feel right. I had tried to write them out and things felt forced, or it just didn't feel like it fit with the overall feeling of the book. And at its core, it's because I wasn't listening to what the character was trying to tell me that they need to be to become a better aspect for the story that I'm working on. So literally just listen to them and see, like, if a character feels wrong when you're writing it, it might not be like the character, if that makes sense. It might be your interpretation of the character. Like, it might not be the fact that you have to like get rid of this character altogether, but it might be that you need to rethink how you maybe made this character's personality, or you maybe made this character's like how they move and how they act, how their backstory is. Maybe those need tweaking, and overall by doing so it'll help them become a better puzzle piece for the overall project that you're trying to work on. And that's how I do it. When a character doesn't feel right, I literally will pause everything and I'll just sit down and say I'm talking to a character and like they're in front of me. I'll sit down and just try to figure out like, where does it feel wrong? Why does it feel wrong? And how can I fix it in terms of like, is it the backstory? Do we need to make adjustments there? Is it the personality? Or is it maybe that the goals that they're currently looking for in the WIP that I'm working on doesn't mesh with the backstory, and how can I change that? And it's really like, once that happens and everything clicks, being able to write a story just snowballs a lot better, just because the communication's there, and you know, like maybe that if something doesn't feel right, it's not because the plot point doesn't fit, but maybe it's because the characters acting on the plot point don't fit with the plot point, and you need to change up something in there, and then it just works, and you can see these characters progress naturally. Another piece of advice that I can give you is that as you're going through draft to draft, through chapter to chapter, you're making changes to your story. It's just how the cookie crumbles. Changes to your story happen. You don't think that something needs to be fixed and you're reading through it again in like the future, and something needs to be changed. Now keep that in mind, because that means your characters will need to change as well. I started out with a very, I'm gonna use this bean of a boy of a character as an example. He started out very brooding, very much like kind of just like a Cassian from A Court of Mist and Fury. He was just very brash and broody, and while he still does have those tendencies at times, and he's still very cheeky, as the story progressed and as he wanted to progress, he ended up being this very broody, kind of badass guy who's kind of cheeky, very flirty at the beginning, and then once you get past those walls, you find out he's just this really big, beefy himbo. Think like Thor from Thor Ragnarok, big himbo vibes, but there's some intelligence in there that he just kind of untaps on his own. And that's how he was built, and that's how he's happy. And it works, because now he doesn't complain as much, except for that one time where he and his partner threatened to divorce themselves because I wasn't giving them enough attention. I'm still salty. Now moving on to kind of like the questions and everything. Some of you guys ended up asking how you would write realistic characters. Now, not to toot my own horn, but toot toot. A lot of the things that I get when I write is that my characters seem really realistic, which is weird to say considering they're fiction, but my biggest piece of advice when you're trying to write like a realistic to you kind of character is to just study people. Study the people in your life, study how they act, and like really just get to know them at their core. Do it with like close friends and family. Don't do it with like a random person you meet. And also study like characters that you love on books. One thing that I did when I was still writing fan fiction was I did a lot of like those character study videos on YouTube. I watched the TV shows really like closely. I read a lot of the Wikipedia pages and read like those like dissertation essays kind of when you're talking about a character on Tumblr, and those helped a lot. And that was a lot of the compliments that I was getting when I wrote fan fiction still, was that these characters feel like they're doing things and saying things that fit with their personality, and it's not just you kind of like trying to rearrange it so it works for you. And that's like really the biggest piece of advice I can give you when it comes to trying to make a realistic character, is just to study people. If you don't know how people work or how you yourself would react in a certain situation, then trying to see how a character would react in a situation is extremely difficult, because then you're just kind of sitting here playing guessing games, and no one likes that. And also, give yourself like a little bit of leeway. I say this very kindly. When people review your shit, they're gonna be like, oh my god, this character's not realistic enough. And you just kind of sit there and go, you're literally reading a piece of fiction. I say to make your characters as realistic to you, and then maybe like your friends, like your close friends and family who will probably be reading this whip as closely as you are trying to get you published. Take their advice into consideration, but like when it comes to you worrying about whether or not someone else outside of your inner circle finds X, Y, and Z super realistic, remember, they're just fictional characters. You can give yourself some leeway. Like if you feel like you're writing a YA character but they don't read YA, they read NA, they like read older, consider bumping up their age as well. Because I remember when I was drafting my main character for this work in progress that I'm doing right now, I started her out at like 16, 17, and then I took a good look at the things that she will be going through to change and become the person I want her to be. And then I realized I would not want my sister, who was 16, 17 at the time I was writing this, to go through half the things she went through. And I don't think my sister would have had the ability to really process and act properly for her to do the things she would need to do in this world. So I bumped up my character, and I believe now she went from 16, 17 to 20, 21, and then finally, then 22, 23, and then finally I think 23, 24. So she's in that age range, and like it just feels better. So like literally just listen to your characters and give them some leeway too. Like if you're gonna write a 16-year-old going through some really shitty shit, expect that the 16-year-old isn't gonna act like you. Expect that they're not gonna sit there and think things rationally, and maybe they might end up having to act impulsively before they sit down and go, frick. Or if they're more mature, you might want to figure out why they're in a position where they can sit down and think about this naturally. What happened to them in the past? How did that change how they look at the world? Just because teenagers have a completely different situation going on. Their minds are changing, their body's changing, but like society doesn't want to catch up with those rapid changes. So it's always a little weird. And I feel like people often forget that when they read and write YA, that these things are happening, and they're not giving these teenagers like the little bit of leeway to change out a little bit, if that makes sense. But literally, if someone says your character is not realistic, but you've done all the work into making them feel like a real person to you and to like the people around you, kindly remind them to take the stick out of their ass and tell them that this work is a work of fiction. The last handful set of questions that you guys did ask me was how to make realistic dialogue. And this goes back to how you can make a realistic character. Literally just study. Study how you and your friends talk, study how you and your partner talks, study how your intonation and your voice changes and the words you use switch out when you talk to a stranger versus when you talk to someone you're really comfortable with. Notice how your tone might change when you're sad, when you're upset, when you're angry. How do your conversations change as that's changing as well? Another piece of advice I have to tell you, watch a lot of TV, read a lot of books, sit down and see like why is this relationship seem so well. If you're an only child writing about sibling dynamic, watch your friends if they have siblings, watch TV shows and movies where siblings are a big theme or that sibling kind of dynamic, and you'll start to pick up on like the healthy bickering and like forgetting to know where the line is sometimes, but having to apologize with maybe like a drive around where you talk or you just offer them food. It really just depends on like the situation, but really the best thing you can ever do to find out what is realistic or not is just to study the things around you. Like you can read a good book and like figure out and pick up all of those things, which I also recommend. Or you can watch a lot of TV and movies, and that typically does have some pretty like, unless the TV show is written kind of weird and the dialogue's a little clunky, some of the dynamics should come naturally because those actors are getting close and they're getting their own chemistry, and that's coming off from the screen into what you're watching. So I just recommend that when you're trying to create realistic dialogue. And again, if it feels weird to you, or the character's trying to tell you that it feels weird to them to say those things, the dialogue probably isn't meant for them, if that makes sense. Like I said, just listen and trust your gut, and once you get a grasp on your characters and everything, figuring out what they need, what they want to do, how they're going to talk is a lot easier. Wrapping up, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is just, one, give yourself some space. don't feel like your characters have to be top tier when you start your first draft. It's the first draft is the fertilizer and the maggots in the soil that you're planting your overall tree in. So don't get caught up in that. Just write and listen to them, and overall just study. Look, it sounds bad because you're sitting here like, I wanted to write and now I have to study, but literally just study the people around you, study your favorite TV shows and books, and see why these characters work so well together. Study your own relationships and like just not mimic them, but see what makes them work. And then at the end of the day, put all those together and start to work on your whip, and like the characters will literally feel like they're flying off the pages to try and scream at you and tell you what they need for this work in progress of yours to be the best it can be. That's all I can really tell you. But that is it for my writing advice video. It's been a minute since I did one, since like May, I think. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit like, subscribe, comment. Hopefully you got something interesting out of this video, and if you guys have any ideas of what you want me to do for future writing advice videos, let me know in the comments down below. All of my social medias will be linked in the description as well if you guys want to find me and suggest me content to make for you for this like kind of series on my channel privately, if you guys want to do that way. But until next time, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!